We are privileged to have a gentleman who accounts for much of what South Africa relies on in terms of our infrastructure. He's been driving the electric mobility message since the early 90s, and many of them consider him the godfather of the e-mobility movement in South Africa, Mr. Winstone Jordaan. Winstone, are you with us, sir?
Absolutely, and thank you for that, Rob. But certainly, I don't see myself as the godfather. I think that title has to go to the Carls and Peter Langleys of the e-mobility world. But great to be here and tell you a little bit about what we've been doing and where we went, how we got here. So yes, just click there. So I think this journey started in earnest for me certainly well before this. But when I was over in Australia in 2005 at the World Solar Challenge, where it was just incredible to see how the technology was advancing and how electric motor technology was moving, battery technologies were being driven forward. And I think the message became clear to me that the future lay in electric vehicles. And I really came back from Australia with the mindset of saying, I've got to get into the space. I didn't quite know where I was going to be in that space. We explored quite a few things. We looked at vehicles. We worked on some development systems. And in around about 2009, well, specifically in 2009, we formally created GridCars. As you know, Carl mentioned it earlier. And the idea was to explore all facets of this industry. I was very fortunate that in 2012, working with the FIA, I got to travel a lot into Europe. And I was in Portugal at one stage and met up with the guys from a program called MobiE. And I was just blown away by the way they were approaching e-mobility, in that they really had understood where the failures were across Europe, because Europe had obviously been evolving for maybe 5 or 6 years already at that time. So they'd already seen what the successful strategies were, what the not so successful strategies were. And I came back from there with the absolute vision that we were going to now develop a system for South Africa, in South Africa, being customized to the requirements of South Africa, but taking the learnings that we learned, or that I'd learned by looking at what's going on in Europe. So based on that, we built a system in South Africa that was based on open standards and really adopted the strong model that had been put across by MobiE, which was the idea of separating the CPO, the EMSP, and then other various layers within that space. But all of these things really contribute to a very flexible and professional system that can be used across the board. One of the big things was ensuring that there's a single payment system, because the biggest frustration, and still today, unfortunately, across Europe, is multiple payment mechanisms. So it's really difficult to know when you get to a charger, how am I going to pay on this one? So we've actually been very successful in only having a single payment standard here in South Africa. And then the biggest milestone for GridCars was 2017, when we were acquired by SolarF. And that really opened up the opportunity for us to invest into the first national network in South Africa. At that time, there was so much discussion where people were saying, oh, it's a catch-22. You can't put chargers down unless there's vehicles, and the vehicle's not going to come if there's no chargers. And, as a company with the new shareholders, we sat down and we had a look at this thing, and we said, really, the only thing we can affect is the network. We can't affect the actual vehicle side of it. So let's get that taken away. And in reality, since about 2018, I think anybody who says there's a catch-22 in South Africa has certainly not understood what's been happening around them. So we've taken that away completely. We've positioned ourselves as one of the leading companies in the world when it looks at the ratio of chargers available to EVs. And that means that we went for a coverage strategy as GridCars. So we went to cover the highways and make sure that we can drive to Cape Town, that we can drive to Durban, and that we can reach all of these areas. So part of what we want that I'm going to just talk around is just a little bit around the environment. So what we've done and what the opportunities are for people within the space. So the first thing is there's a big fear of job losses. And I think, unfortunately, we have to face this and say, there are very likely to be change in jobs, not necessarily job losses. Future jobs are going to be different. We have to understand that. If we're going to try and defend old jobs or old style jobs, then we're just going to stand still. We're not going to move forward in technology. So we must understand there are what is perceived as job losses, but really it's changing jobs and it's really moving towards the future. And these changes have happened before, and I'll give you an example of that and why I say that. So it's important that we manage the change, that we don't let the change manage us, that we're able to get behind that and move that technology forward as we go with it. There are massive opportunities that come with these changes. So again, if we resist the changes, we lose the opportunities. And the quicker if we lose the opportunity, we may never be able to catch it up because the world moves so fast. So the rate of change is incredible. I think, there've been various speakers today, and no doubt over the next day and a half still, that'll be talking to what we think the world is going to be doing, how fast we think this change will happen, all of these sort of things. And I think if you look at things like the Osborne effect, we know that this change is going to happen more rapidly than what any of us anticipates. It's a technology evolution. It will go that direction. And the changes they're a big advantage, a huge advantage in the direction that we go in. It's going to be cheaper, more efficient. It's going to be cleaner. Just last night watching all of our shenanigans happening in Europe at this stage and thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to see big fuel prices. Okay, it doesn't really affect me because I drive electric, but at the same time, it's going to affect our economy. So in a way, we're in a war and things that are happening that have got very little to do with us down here on the southern end of Africa, but we will get impacted and our economy will get hurt. And based on that, moving towards things like electrification really starts to protect us from those things, that we take some level of control over these destinations ourselves. So over the next 20 years, we will see, there'll still be hydrocarbon fuels, precisely for the next 20 years at least. So we're going to still see petrol and diesel. Fuel types will change. There will be synthetic fuels, electricity, gases. Fuel stations are going to be changing. They're going to become logistics hubs. We're going to see charging services becoming at most primary locations. So shopping centers, offices, they'll all have these services available. And as we move forward, there's going to be a lot of new technology. Electronic systems and security becomes absolutely paramount. So being able to ensure that we've got, as we move into this digital age, that things are secure. And we've got to look towards recycling, localization, the urban transport modes, all of these things. And it's great to see three-wheelers coming in. It was part of the original GridCars strategy, which we gave up, and with no regrets, because our focus became charging. But it is so good to see all of these ideas that we were discussing and exploring in those early days coming to fruition in South Africa, and we're going to see some really good technology around that. So what does the value chain look like? So keeping it relatively simple, we've got all of the infrastructure services that need to be provided to the customer, and then we've got the provision of the actual vehicle side. So I don't sell vehicles. Clearly, there's lots of OEMs out there selling them, and these are the people that we've got to rely on for that. But what we can affect is we can look at charge station development, so looking at developing the technology around the charging stations. We can look at developing networks and the provision of charging infrastructure. We could look at back office services and network development. So services supporting the network developers. Installation, maintenance, and supporting the charging infrastructure is paramount to that this is good. There are so many opportunities in that space. Billing and management systems, power generation, distribution, and site development. So developing new sites in places that look like that where e-mobility can be used. So in order to get some context, I took the numbers that NAMSA has been sharing, and essentially this shows what they're anticipating for the growth over the next, 15 years, well, 13 years. So you can see they're predicting about 1.2 million electric vehicles that should be in South Africa by 2035. Now, NAMSA, I think typically this is a number we can trust, that they understand the industry very well, and they've been informed by the OEMs. If we use just those numbers, this is the investment at the bottom, is the investment that we would need in charging infrastructure per year. And you can see that very quickly gets up to R1 billion a year that we're going to be putting into infrastructure. And by the end of this period, probably as much as R3 billion a year has to go into infrastructure. That's just to keep pace with the projections that are coming out of NAMSA themselves. So GridCars has also been playing with some models, and I just thought it'll be interesting to show that. I just compared the two. So the green ones are the model GridCars was looking at, As you can see in the beginning, we underestimate. NAMSA gives us a higher number, and towards the end, we overestimate. Now, this is part of that rapid transition. It's so unpredictable 10 years from now, to be able to determine where those numbers are going to go. But to put that in perspective, the graph on the right-hand side is actually showing you what the world average is. So in other words, if we take the growth in Europe and we apply that same growth to South Africa, which is not necessarily reasonable, but I just want you to see how far ahead of us it is. So if we're going to grow at a quarter of the rate of Europe, then you're at the GridCars number. But if you take the number projected by NAMSA, we're down to probably a 10th or a 15th of the rest of the world. So these are very interesting dynamics, and I think these are the topics that are going to take us forward in understanding this industry better. I put this little slide together just to give you an idea of how rapidly things are changing just this year. So if you look from 2014, that was when the first Nissan Leafs came to the country. You can see 2015 is when BMW i3s came in. And there was relatively no change to the market, except Nissan stopped supplying vehicles in 2017. And very quickly, we then see 2021, we got 3 new vehicles, and I think we all celebrated. Look what we're looking at this year. So yes, by the end of this year, we're very likely to see 20 to 30 new models in the South African market. It is changing fast. We are going to really see some great products at all levels in the industry. Still a bit of a focus on the higher end, but that's normal. You know, when cell phones first came in, the more expensive things are there. Those expensive vehicles are what pave the road and really cover the expenses involved in getting that industry out in place. So I want to use fuel stations as an example, and I'm going to quickly run through some evolution within the fuel station world. So firstly, you might ask, why are we showing people that are shoveling manure out of the roads and the streets? Well, these are the first guys that were going to lose their jobs when the automotive industry started. And because they were cleaning the manure, and that was just their job to look after it. It was quite a chaotic case. You could see this is what some of the streets looked like if they weren't cleaned properly. So these guys were absolutely essential. But as we move towards vehicles and petrol vehicles in those days, but also some electric vehicles, the idea was that their job would now be under threat. And we didn't really know where their job would go. So in the beginning, we were buying petrol from pharmacies. And the idea was that the pharmacy was the only places that were licensed to sell petrochemicals. So based on that, this is where the fuel station started. You bought a couple of bottles, took them outside, put them in your car. Of course, the pharmacies very quickly realized that, wait a minute, it's going to be better if we have a pump around the back and we just pump the stuff straight into the cars. And that's where your very first fuel pumps came from. So if you want to call that, there's our first petrol station. That changed. So over the years, that became the primary business. So they were no longer a thing. You can see it's a grocery, but it's no longer a pharmacy. And they are just pumping the different fuels that they needed for the vehicles at that time. Of course, over time, that modernized. So yes, that's a modern fuel station. And then it even got better. They started offering services on the vehicles, and you could see the things. In the early 80s, we looked at much broader services available at the sites, where we were starting to not just offer the gas, but also, or petrol in our case, but really start to build a little hub around that. And eventually we come to what we see today as a fuel station. So anybody who thinks that the fuel stations haven't evolved, they've evolved massively over the time. Now, the question is, do we then sit back and say, oh, okay, so they evolved, now they're going to stop evolving? Not at all. So they're going to continue to evolve, and they're going to continue to change, and they're going to continue to be different to what we expect them to be. And those changes will be influenced by the market as things come forward. So, I would never have thought in the 1970s that you'd find quality coffee and things at a filling station, and you do nowadays. So the fuel industry is changing rapidly. There's new fuels, and we can debate which of these is going to be the major ones, whether it's hydrocarbon fuels or other liquid petroleum gases, e-mobility or electric, biofuels, and hydrogen. All of these things are going to be part of that mix. Personally, I believe that the e-mobility is going to be the biggest chunk of it, so really 90%. But there's space for all of these things there for different types of vehicles. We see a lot of non-fuel related things at these sites. More and more fuel stations on the highways are starting to get hospitality services. So they're putting in small hotels next to the fuel stations. There's a lot of last mile delivery points. So you'd be looking at your three-wheelers doing delivery from these areas. Most people now have car washes, restaurants, other conveniences that you have at these sites. As we move forward, there'll be more and more services like fleet management, vehicle servicing again might come back into that, ride sharing, ride hailing. All of these things are going to come into that space, and we will see that evolution. And a fuel station that does all of this is going to be very different to a fuel station that's just giving out petrol today. The service levels have to be different, the skill levels have to be different, so we have to understand and work with that. And this is an example of what some of the future fuel stations might look like. One of my favorite slides to put in on a presentation like this is to say, well, this is a vision of a site that was developed in the UK, where they were saying, well, this is charging only. And the vision was out there. They put a lot of pictures out for a few years. And last year, they published the real pictures of the actual site. So I'm going to flip through that very slowly again. I go back. There's the graphics that they've been putting around for the last 3 or 4 years. And there's the station last year completed, operational and working, a dedicated electric charging station. So this is the future where these things are going to be evolving to. So how does GridCars support new businesses and open up opportunities? And at the same time, I'll tell you a little bit about where we actually how we put the network down. So the first thing to understand about charging, and I know this has been raised earlier this morning already, and the most important thing is that charging has to be connected and charging has to be smart. GridCars took a decision about 2.5 years ago where we just said we will never sell a non-smart, non-connected charging system. So all of the systems that we're putting out into the market, whether they are home systems at the lowest end of the market or at the top end of putting DC systems, they're all smart and they're all connected and they're all capable of engaging with the network, understanding the energy availability, being sensitive to time, being sensitive to all of these things that they need to be able to manage. So that's really, really, really important as we go forward. There's a lot of other services that come with having a good charging network out there, making sure that we've got appropriate hardware solutions, not just finding and saying, we'll put any hardware down. You must understand the market, understand how that's going to be used. Solid technical support in those areas, a good, strong back office. So this is the software side of it. And of course, a good energy strategy, understanding how that will impact people going forward. So GridCars, we supply charging stations. We operate charging networks on behalf of customers. Of course, we also operate our own charging network, and we manage the customers within those networks, so the e-mobility side of things. And then finally, we invest in developing networks wherever possible. So this is what the current network looks like across South Africa. You'll see it is constrained to the major highways. I can tell you there's some discussion in place now for moving up towards Springbok and Uppington. And part of that is because there are discussions about connecting into a network that we may see within Namibia, Botswana, and all of these areas. So it starts to become important that there's a Southern African strategy as we look at where this is going to go. The GridCars objective was never to do popular locations, although yes, we have got some popular locations and we can, but it was to get coverage. So we set an objective that said, put a charger every 200 kilometers on all the major highways. We've exceeded that on the N2, we've exceeded that on the N3. On the N1, because it's quite a more difficult one, there are some sections that are 200 kilometers. So whereas on the Garden route, if you look down at the N2, it really it's open that most people with a range of 100, 120 kilometers can be able to drive that route and successfully navigate all the way through to Port Elizabeth. So it's really about opening up routes. So as we look forward, we want to identify new routes, and whether the location is popular or not, we need to achieve the coverage. So we've got to then look at taking those into the other areas. So opportunities for people wanting to get involved, establish your own network. GridCars, we have a large network now and a large DC network at that, but there are more and more people now starting to develop their own AC networks. As a starting point. That said, there are people who are looking at building DC networks. And the idea is build the networks. We need more networks in South Africa. Right now, we are ahead of where this technology is going, but we might not be able to stay ahead once the vehicle sales come, because it depends. Are you looking at the NAAMSA prediction, or are you looking at the potential of the GridCars prediction, where it really does pick up radically? And when that happens, we won't keep up with developing and changing the infrastructure. So now is the time for us to get involved in that. If you're looking at a business in the renewable energy space, in electrical and civil parts of the charging stations, install and support, there's opportunities to start your own CPO or to actually establish an EMP service. There's some difficulties in both of those. If you're going to be starting a CPO, make sure you've got a strong software partner. This is the lifeblood of your business in terms of how it operates. Same with the EMP. The EMP, not as trivial as opening up a CPO. A CPO, more the management of charging stations, whereas an EMP deals with finance. So you've got to have a strong banking partner that can tick all the boxes in terms of security and all of those things in place. So other areas of where business... other areas where business models are starting to come out of this, and that is, if you look at the different levels within the industry, and I've tried to just highlight it a little bit over here for you to give you some sort of idea, is we do separate the charge point owner from the site. But of course, the site can be the charge point owner. So at that point, the charge point owner is responsible for technology beyond the distribution board. If you look at bigger properties, often the properties would actually take from the distribution board right up to the isolators, and then you can install the charging infrastructure below that. And of course, when it's your property and you own the property, you're going to be an owner operator, and you're going to pretty much go right up to the charging stations. As we move forward, we're going to have to start looking at the impact into the grid. So we're going to have to start going back along that line. Up until now, many of the sites, there's sufficient power at the site, but we're more and more now starting to engage sites where we've got to go back and have a look at the transformers of the municipality and see whether that infrastructure is going to be upgraded. And those become strategic decisions. They're going to take longer to negotiate. There's going to be a lot more money involved in those. But that's the basic idea, is that we've got to build our infrastructure as we're evolving the technology that we're driving. So GridCars has spent a huge portion of our effort. So in fact, I would say the majority of our investment into the company has been into our back-end services, and not just the back-end, but the server environment that we're working in. So we have a highly secure, fully redundant back-end system. This means that we've got very high uptime for our customers and for our charging stations. It also means that if people are using our services to establish their own CPOs or EMPs, we would then have a solid background that we work in, or at least back-end system that we're managing that on. It's managed through a company called Intev and Internet Solutions, both really outstanding in their field when it comes to this level of security and management of these things. Obviously, new times, we've got to worry about things like the anti-hijacking protection in the software space. So there's a lot of these things that come through that. At this stage, as an EMP, GridCars, this is the customer base that we're working with. So all of these OEMs are using the GridCars EMP backend, albeit with their own branded cards. So this brings all of these cards into the same space. So what we're able to do now is it makes roaming across different networks quite possible. So for example, we've got networks, I'm going to use an example like Breeve. And if we want to roam on that Breeve network, their chargers are on our network. These charging cards will work on the Breeve chargers in terms of opening up those opportunities. And that's going to happen more and more. There's discussions these processes underway with companies like Rubicon, where we'll also be looking at integrating with their back-end systems and ensuring that the cards roam across all of the different hardware. So this is really important when it comes to building this. Again, single payment platforms. So payment platforms that is the customer knows what to expect. You don't want to get to the charger and think, how do I pay for this? It should be clear. This is how you pay. It works everywhere. Roaming across all charging partners. Now, while the technical capability of being able to roam is absolutely entrenched at this stage in South Africa, it works on a technology called OCPI, which is an open standard used across Europe as the standard for communicating between networks. The actual roaming agreements, though, are still physical agreements between two partners. So if there is, and I'll just use fake names, so if a network partner called partner number 1 has got a charger and he does not want a EMP partner to charge on that network for whatever reason, he's absolutely entitled to stop that. So while the capability is within the system, it's not necessarily that it's contracted to being able to do it, that you could actually do it. So as a hardware offering, GridCars has three primary products that we promote in the market. The first thing is, and I've said it earlier as well, is smart home charging systems. So using the smart home charging systems, we're able to ensure that you don't have trips at your home. We're able to integrate the charging stations into your solar to make them sensitive to stress within the network in your area. Time of use, they can be sensitive to understanding the cost of pricing and therefore charge you at certain times. And in residential estates, we can share limited energy across multiple networks. So that's what smart home charging is. Public AC charging is when we're going into a public environment. We've got units that are, we call them hardened, so they're nice and solid. They're made of good extruded aluminium in most cases, and they really are good quality units that can be used for public charging, because obviously in a public place, there will be a little bit more wear and tear on it. And then finally, we have what we call public DC, and this is really the top end of the products where we're now starting to do fast charging. So GridCars can go anywhere from 30 kilowatts up to north of 400 kilowatts in terms of charging systems. And we can also, that system that you see on the bottom right, that can be duplicated, so it can be massively enhanced. So for example, if a fuel station wants to put 5 of those units down, we can put megawatts down with a site in terms of scaling that. So this gives some examples of business models, and I'm going to point you first and foremost to the thing that says projected at 4 to 5 years from now. So the numbers at the bottom do not mean what you're going to get tomorrow if you invested in this, but it gives you an idea of what we believe as GridCars is a reasonable business case 4 to 5 years from now. This does assume that the charger is busy 6 hours a day, which is not that much, and that you are working 300 days a year, and that you have a margin of about R1.20 per kilowatt hour. I did hear Rob and George having a little bit of banter around the pricing. And yes, completely, the pricing will come down over time. And I think, you have to understand that as these more and more charge in, it's easier and easier to cover the capex cost of actually investing in this equipment. And until that time, we've got to keep it as reasonable as possible. So the GridCars network is R5.88 per kilowatt hour is what you'll charge, what you'll pay. But I did some quick back of the envelope mathematics the other day, and if we had to try and break even on that, we'd probably be charging more like R100 a kilowatt hour. So it's not a profit center today. It needs a few years to get to that. But this gives you some idea of 3 different scenarios, what we call a starter, a community, an entry-level DC, and an advanced DC. And at the bottom line is when you want to look at, that's sort of your income potential per year that you could make off of a charging unit like that, assuming that you can keep it busy. So this is where business opportunities are going to come from as people want to start rolling out their own technology and managing their own systems. So this just gives you some idea of what a charging station looks like at a filling station. This is one of the ones that we're particularly proud of. It was, let's call it an experiment that we did earlier this year in January, and really just to get an understanding of how we're going to be looking at taking the GridCars brand forward in raising awareness and having higher visibility at some of the sites that we go into. So it's very much a prototype site. If you want to see it and go and take some selfies, I think we'll appreciate that. It's at Four Ways Mall in Johannesburg. So do a selfie, link us, chat to us, and tell us about it that you put out there. The last thing I want to quickly do before we go over to the questions is I'm going to quickly give you a little video. It's a very short video. It's only 49 seconds. This video is going to show the evolution of charging as when it started in South Africa. So from 2015, if I remember the dates correctly, and it'll just give you a 49-second where I'm going to run through 5 years of charging in South Africa. What you want to watch for is 2 things. The blue dot, the big one, is going to be a charging session. So you'll see them flash every now and again that says there was a charging session. And the black dot is when chargers were installed. So you'll see a black dot must first appear, then the blue dot flashes, and then the black dot will stay there that shows there's now a charger there. So watch for the next 49 seconds, and I'll talk you through it quickly. So you can see it all started in Gauteng. So there were some charging stations by BMW in Midrand. Gives you an idea. Then we moved to Pretoria, and we started seeing charging sessions happening all over the country suddenly. So that was around just after 2016 with the public network that was starting to be developed, mostly BMW at that point. As you can see that as time went on, you got to some of the more remote areas like Nelspruit and Petersburg, they all started to come online. And that's when the first highway went in, was in early 2019. So you can see now the road trips start happening. Look at people driving all the way down to Cape Town. You can see over and over. And we're now halfway through the number of sessions that were done in the country, but we're already in 2021. So watch how quick it happens in 2021. You can see. So network usage was absolutely phenomenal as we ran through those things. So I hope that came across as was intended. And thank you. That's everything from my side. So I think I am a couple of minutes early, Rob, but I'm sure there'll be some questions.
Fantastic, Winston. Yeah, and look, there's lots of questions. I'm gonna cherry pick. I think people firstly congratulating GridCars on the phenomenal work you guys have done. Definitely taking that leap of faith in 2017 to put the charges down before the cars were necessarily there. And yeah, pioneering the way. So lots of comments coming through for congrats to you and obviously your partners at SolarF on that. So thank you very much for that. I think there's 2 or 3 questions asking around any kind of, do you foresee any regulation coming down in terms of the rates of which people are charged for, especially public network charging? As you mentioned, yes, there's economies of scale. As a risk for GridCars, somebody is asking, do you foresee any regulation coming in terms of rates and policing of that kind of industry, similar to what we have in the petrol industry where it's regulated?
Yeah. So I think we certainly don't expect that we're going to be seeing that. And the reason why is quite simple. You regulate industries where people are subject to being exploited. With charging, you could charge at home every single day. You don't have to ever charge in public. Also, there are some public locations that you can go to where you get free charging. So where obviously it might be a slower charge when it's free, it might not be a fast charge. So just based on that, the customer is never is never in a position where he's exploited. Secondly, as the industry evolves, you might find that if you go to Laingsburg today, the only charger there is a GridCars charger. So we might then say, well, that could be subject to exploitation. But the difference is the price we charge in Laingsburg is the same price we charge in the middle of Cape Town, where everybody else has got other charging stations. And when people start to enhance the network in Laingsburg, so somebody now looks and says, it's time we're going to put down a charger in Laingsburg, we'd be quite pleased. Okay, part of it is that there is there's a small risk. We've got a single charger. If our site has got power problems, then that charger is not going to work, and you're probably going to spend the night in Laingsburg. So having 2 chargers in Laingsburg takes some of the pressure off of us, so that we now know, there's now an opportunity that if our site has got no power, the other site will be fine. So there's a lot of that will evolve forward. So I don't think they will regulate it. We have had discussions with the people that deal with these regulations, and they too have shared the same sentiment, in that people have a choice. You can go to other places, and most of the time you'll be charging at home anyway.
Fantastic. And I think that makes a good point there, Winston. I have a couple of questions as well, asking the reason, and I think maybe you touched on it in your talk, is why is the reason that people have to have the GridCars RFID card in order to charge on the network? Why can they not just, for example, just use their credit card? Like, I suppose the inference being made, you could just tap a credit card to pay for your charge. Can you maybe just explain that a little bit? We got a couple of questions from our attendees asking why can't we just pay directly with a credit card and have to subscribe to the network?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of ways to reply to that. The first one is, across Europe, they are very, there is quite a big drive to use credit cards, but it's a solution. It's a solution because they never built a single payment system. So it's not because they think it's the best. So I think that's the first point I want to make from a European perspective. In South Africa, we do only have a single system, and it's not necessarily a GridCars RFID card. It is any RFID card that is properly registered and has got money behind it. In other words, has a financial system behind it that can ensure that it will work. The way the standard works is it is open. It's a standard called OCPI. So other cards are able to enter that. There is a barrier to get on, simply because you're dealing with people's money and you've got to manage that money properly. So what also happens is that with an RFID card, we can do free charging. You can't do free charging with a credit card. We can also do vouchering. So, Rob, at your office, you could put down a charging station there, and you could give all your friends a voucher, and they could come and charge using the voucher instead of having to pay their own money for it. And based on that, you would find that the idea is that you can't do that with a credit card. So you get a lot more flexibility with this. And the final point is that we're actually moving away from cards completely. So the newer cars are coming out with what we call plug and charge. So that means the car plugs in, it authenticates itself with a digital certificate. That gives a secure transaction through to the back end, which starts the charging session. So there's no need for a charging mechanism. Finally, credit cards will be part of the payment cycle. We are in the process of discussing this with the banks. It's just not trivial. So the credit card information or the credit cards will be linked in the background so that when you do plug and charge, you don't have to swipe your card. You just plug your card and it would link to your credit card and draw the money from your credit card. So the actual interface to the equipment is going to be changing and modernizing over the next probably year or two.
Fantastic. And I think that you've answered actually about 5 questions you've answered in one go. So thank you, Winston. I'm definitely not giving out vouchers for anyone for free charging in my office. That's not happening. Let's just draw a line in the sand here. So maybe an unrelated question, but obviously your knowledge of EVs and the whole e-mobility movement is second to none in the country. I have a question. Somebody saying, what will the future of OEM after-sales will the future of OEM after-sales profitability be massively impacted, taking into account that EVs have less services and less maintenance? Surely this is going to lead to a loss of total cost recovery percentages for dealerships. So as we move more towards e-mobility, I mean, everyone knows EVs don't need to be serviced as much. Is this going to be something that the dealerships are going to have to tackle, because that's a major income generator for them, is that, traditional ICE cars have to be serviced 10, 15, 20,000 Ks, and EVs, just from brakes, wear and tear to everything else, they don't need that. So obviously somebody having a question around, is that a fact? Is that true, or is that just stuff that's being peddled on the internet?
So Rob, without a doubt, it's something that has to be looked at. I'm certainly not a dealer consulting expert, so I don't understand all of the dynamics of that. But what I can tell you, and I said it in the presentation, and that is that things will change. We should not be expecting our businesses to stand still. So if a dealership is saying the business we do today is going to be the same as the business we do in 10 years' time, then I would ask him, is the business you did 10 years ago the same as what it is the business you do today? And it's absolutely not. So dealerships will evolve. And I would imagine that one of the areas that they're going to have to evolve in is change in how that, where that weighting is, in words, whether you make other money out of other areas. I went to a dealership yesterday. I'll keep the name unknown, but if you pop around to a couple of dealers in the mainland area, you might find it. And that is, they have an incredible coffee shop that's been set up in the dealership. They're planning to keep the dealership open until 11 at night, that the coffee shop is there for food, coffee. You can come there as a small restaurant. It's an amazing idea. And I think we're going to see these sort of reinventing happening within the dealership spaces, where they're looking and saying, guys, we've got to step forward and understand where this is going and really build the way that we're going to work going forward. It's not going to be how it was 10 years ago. So I don't see a problem with it. Yeah, there will be 1 or 2 relatively uncomfortable decisions that have to be made, but this is what we pay for progress and how we take them forward.
Fantastic. And I've got another question, and I think it's interesting to ask this one. And this is something that where you've obviously in your talk, you're encouraging a lot of other charging infrastructure. I think as South Africans, we look at it and we say, all competition, we must compete and we mustn't have, you're encouraging a lot more people to put charges down, and a lot of people are commenting on how interesting that standpoint is from GridCars, who is the market leader, encouraging, dare I say, competition to come into the market and do more charges. Do you see this as holistically a view of, dare I say, the more players in the field, the more people who grow the pie, so to speak? Because I'm looking at comments saying, very interesting, GridCars encouraging other people to come into the market. What's, dare I say, layman's terms, what's the thinking behind that?
Firstly, I think that we're just realistic. We can't keep people out of the market. Secondly, I think any company who does that should be taken up in front of the competition board if you're doing the things to keep people out. So at the end of the day, we understand this market will evolve. At the same time, I gave you some indications of how much investment is going to be needed in infrastructure. And as excited as what I am about what the future looks like and how strong I believe GridCars will become over the next 10 years, putting 5 and 10 billion rand a year into infrastructure, we're not going to have that type of money. So we understand that this has to be a collaborative effort of an industry. And the more we can ensure that this is done right, because if we didn't, we could just leave people to their own and let them make mistakes. And those mistakes will hurt everybody in the industry. Because if somebody jumps in, tries to install chargers, make some bad decisions, and based on that, they go out and they say, oh, the charging business doesn't work, nobody must go. Then again, we're stuck. Nobody's actually investing in the infrastructure. So it's really important for us that for people wanting to invest, we want them to have a positive experience. More importantly, as they have a positive experience, that'll mean that the industry as such, the people supplying the vehicles, the charging hardware suppliers, all of these things coming in from behind, would be able to look and say, wow, we've got a great market, it's positive, the people understand. We don't want to confuse the customer. We don't want the customer thinking that, we're all going to learn from our own mistakes. Let's learn together, let's work together, let's grow an industry together. And I think that's definitely the view of GridCars. It's got to be about collaboration. It's got to be about working together. It's got to be about seeing that go. And there will be healthy competition in me wanting a particular site and somebody else looking for the same site. But if I look at, I'm going to take another example, a company called Breathe, and they're looking for smaller sites across the country. And I met with Sean the other day and I asked him, I said, look, I'm looking at these 5 sites. And he said, oh, no, don't go there. You're going to burn your fingers. Go here, go there. And he immediately started guiding me on where I should be looking to go. And I think that's the spirit of where this industry has got to be. We're a customer service organization. We are serving the customer. It's no good we have fights in the background and hurt the customer in the long term with confusing standards, with different levels, because we are allowing people to fail. All of those things come out of it.
All right, and I suppose maybe it's just a new viewpoint as we move into this brave new world, but very refreshing to hear, Winston. I mean, that's a great viewpoint to have. And I've got a couple. There are a lot of questions flying in at the moment. But one I've got is asking about all the new models launching in the country. Now I know you work closely with a lot of the OEMs and stuff. People just a general question: with all the new models we're expecting to be launched in the country, my assumption and the answer is going to be yes to this question is that the GridCars network is compatible with all these models that we're looking to have land in South Africa.
Absolutely. So, I think to put that debate out, and that is, when we started in this game, there were 2 major standards worldwide. There's the Japanese standard called CHAdeMO and the European standard called CCS. And in 2013, I think there was a belief that it's it's 50-50. So half the cars are going to the one and half the cars are going to the other. We as GridCars had a lot of experience in Europe, so we'd seen what was happening and where things were going, and we took the position that GridCars would only support a single standard, which was CCS. And within 2 years, and this had nothing to do with us, within 2 years it was absolutely clear that CCS was the winning standard going forward, and that CHAdeMO was going to fall by the wayside for various reasons. One, they couldn't step up to the right power levels. Secondly, the communication they used, a thing called CAN, and CAN was never intended to be outside of the vehicle, so there's no security on that. So you might be able to hack a charge point if you didn't work through those things. So based on all of those things, ultimately, we could see CCS was moving forward as the single standard. What we can say is that other than the first 90-odd Nissan vehicles that came into the country using CHAdeMO, no other vehicle has been brought into South Africa for commercial purposes as a CHAdeMO. So there's a single standard in South Africa for DC charging called CCS, and a single standard for AC charging called Type 2, which is the 2 forms. And those really will be the standards taking us forward for at least the next few years. And maybe it's 10, maybe it's 20. I don't see any big changes coming in that space.
Fantastic. And then I've got a last two quick questions before I let you go. I know you're a busy man, Winston. There's a question around how many, off the top of your head, do you know how many EV charging stations are within Gauteng, GridCar charging stations? And then I know the answer to the second one because I've been to one of them. Any partnerships with the big retail shopping centres, Menlyn Main, Mall of Africa, etc.? I know those two mentioned both have GridCars stations. I've been there, I've seen them. But yeah, if you could just give us some insight into how many public charging stations are currently in Gauteng at the moment.
So Gauteng is a little bit more tricky. I'd have to go and have a proper look at it. I can tell you there's more than 260 odd stations across the country. I'm saying odd because between January and let's say middle of March this year, we would have installed another 33 sites. No, I'm lying, another 38 sites. So it's a rapidly moving deadline, or at least number. So yeah, more than 260 charging stations across the country. I would guess at least 40% of those being in the Gauteng area, and maybe not, because the highways take a big portion of those as well. And then yes, you're correct. We have got agreements with most of the major property companies. And that's just where we've placed charging stations. So certainly we're also very aware of fuel companies and property companies that are looking to develop their own networks, many of them which are working with us to help, or with us advising them on how to build their networks and sharing our experience so that they can get it right and pick the right locations for it. So yes, you'll see more and more in fuel stations, shopping centers, office blocks. They'll be rolling out, I think, I'd like to believe exponentially over the next 5 years.
Fantastic. And then I think the last question, Winston, and I'm going to have to ask one quickly. There's a couple of people asking the dreaded question, Tesla, a question mark. Do you foresee Tesla coming into South Africa at some point in the near future? And would Tesla, because obviously Tesla runs their own infrastructure and charging network, what are your insights or thoughts around the Tesla question?
So I think, so will Tesla come to South Africa? Absolutely. I think that'd be stupid not to. We will eventually be a strong market. The Tesla standard is something that was very strong in the beginning with Tesla, whereas Tesla more recently has also moved to CCS. So most of the vehicles now do CCS charging. I think case in point, the Tesla that's down in Port Elizabeth has got a CCS standard that plugs into our charging infrastructure without a problem. So based on that, I would think that coming into a country like South Africa, and this is not just my opinion, we have had some discussion with the people involved and in Tesla, and that is that they would certainly not look to building the entire network of their own. And more we're seeing them open up that network to other things worldwide anyway. When will they come to South Africa? I'm disappointed that they haven't already, in that, there's a lot of people that look and say, oh, wow, this is Tesla. For me, I take my hat off to the OEMs that are here. And I don't celebrate a vehicle that is a great vehicle, but currently has not made a commitment to South Africa to actually bring vehicles and help us grow our market locally. So if you want to hold names high, hold high the names of Jaguar, Audi, Mercedes-Benz, all of these, Volvo, everybody that has brought vehicles into the country now, while it's not that popular, and have forged that market and done that. When Tesla comes to South Africa, they're not going to be leaders like they were in the rest of the world. They're going to be followers. They're going to be following the success of the other people that are already here.
Fantastic. Winston, thank you so very, very much. I've got a flurry of questions which I'll try and get through to them. I've got one or two people asking how do they work for GridCars. I'm pointing them to your website to go and get in touch with you. So I'm sure you might get a couple of CVs. But thank you very, very much, sir, for your time. It's been an absolute privilege. I think we could talk for hours on end about the opportunities. But credit to GridCars for supporting other infrastructure providers and having such an open mindset, and also for taking the plunge. And I think there's many people just saying thank you, GridCars, for leading the way, so to speak. So thank you to yourself. I know on a personal level it's been a long journey for you. So well done. And thank you for being our broadcast sponsor of EMSA 2022. We really appreciate the support.